whether one starts with the Dhamma or the Vinaya, one still will be engaging with the truth of what the Buddha taught. So these were the only ones that the Buddha talked about and taught for the 45 years of his teaching career. This I wanted to mention because, as earlier we were discussing about the topic about certain traditions not having sufficient exposure, shall we say, or emphasis on the suttas, versus their adherence to and practice of and reliance on the Vinaya, the set of rules for the bhikkhus. Often many people think that this is only for the bhikkhus or bhikkhunis. They're not just for us. There's plenty of Dhamma there. This was like a double layer proof that the Buddha put in place so that the person can use either each of these in a single fashion, and more preferably both together, especially in context of comparing something they hear, they read somewhere. Instead of accepting or rejecting these statements, the Buddha advises us to go ahead and to look up these things, whether they're there in the suttas, and then to go and check it in the Vinaya. And if it's not there, he says, just throw it out, along with the person who's come up with whatever theory that they have heard, that they're advocating, which may not be the teaching of the Buddha. It's not the Dhamma. And in order for us to know that it is, in fact, in cases where it is, that also will be the result of us comparing these statements that have been heard or read somewhere, once they have seen to be there in the suttas and in the Vinaya, as well as one's own personal experience of these truths found in the suttas and the Vinaya. So, this, by the way, is, I believe it's sutta number Book of Fours in the Anguttara Nikaya, sutta number 190, the great sources. I recently retranslated and uploaded it on YouTube. That's why I remember it so well. I think it's 190 anyhow. It's not, but it's there, either 189 or 190 in the Book of Fours. Anyhow, this conversation began as we were discussing how it is so easy for an individual to use their own interpretive methods or descriptive language, their own ways of explaining, elaborating on the teachings, even if they do understand it quite well. But because each of us are different people, and we have our own background, there are our own cultural conditionings and our own usage of the English language in this case, we can come up with our own ways of describing. Now, for the person who's describing, so long as they're legitimately anchored on the suttas, on the pariyatti and patipada, practice, not just the learning, it is equally important, if not even more, for this teacher, to make sure that the listeners, or one's own students, or those people who will be following and maybe reading the words that are going to be recorded perhaps, so that they don't go ahead and treat our renditions, shall we say, which on the surface might seem or might be not in coherence with the teaching of the Buddha, simply because they're not found in the suttas anywhere. However, the experiential aspect of what these words or sentences might represent for this person, this teacher, might be the very same things that are being described in the suttas. However, the teacher, let's say, omitted to draw that similarity, to show the Dhammic pedigree, if you will, of their statements, tracing it back to the suttas. And that why you can legitimize, that is the way, rather, in my opinion, to still be coloring within the lines. Because as teachers, we need to be very cognizant of the danger that is always there. I see this quite often, where there is teacher worship, where bhikkhus are worshipping their own bhikkhu teachers, instead of going back to the suttas, specifically to the Buddha himself, and considering him. This is something that I've noticed, especially within Western monastics, for some reason. You don't see that much of it in Asia, especially, for example, like the Thai forest tradition. You don't see that much. The teacher is always seen to be not Ajahn Mun, for example, but he's just pointing the finger back to the Buddha. Same with Ajahn Mahabua, for example. But again, this is not a criticism or critique. It's just a way for us to become a little bit more aware in adding those verbal footnotes, if you will, if we're giving a Dhamma talk, so that the listener, who might not be as well versed as the teacher giving the talk, so they cannot probably connect the dots and fall into the trap of considering the words of this specific or particular teacher to be it. And they end up carrying those statements as Dhamma. And they're not Dhamma. the representative of the experience of the teacher that comes from, inspired by what they had read or might have read in some sutta or in the Vinaya. Now, as I was mentioning to you earlier, before this recording, how it really, it's a double layered proof system. I'm referring now to the suttas in the 5 Nikayas and the Vinaya. So long as the Bhikkhu, so long as the person is using at least either of these two, you're not going to get lost. You're not going to go too far. Be sidetracked, get off the reservation. So long as you are truly, fully, and dedicatedly practicing. Now again, this is in relation to the tradition that we call today the Theravada, or the branches of Theravada practitioners. And that's how this conversation had begun earlier, where some bhikkhus might not be practicing, and bhikkhunis might not be well versed or practicing the suttas, living off of the suttas and the truths found in them. And instead their focus primarily is, let's say, on the Vinaya aspect. Very well. There's tons of Dhamma there as well. So they're like the two mirrors. Remember the reference to the sources, the great sources I mentioned, that the Buddha used? He gave actually 4 examples, 4 great sources he mentions. But in all these 4, each of these, again, we're seeing the suttas and the Vinaya as the source. No matter how the contexts might change, the sources remain the same. So I wouldn't worry too much. Even if you find, let's say, a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni who might not be well versed in the suttas, but who is dedicated to the practice of the Vinaya, to still be practicing the Dhamma. And conversely, a person who might not be practicing on the outside, seemingly not to be practicing the Vinaya, not holding so tightly, rigidly to it, but dedicated oneself to the study and the practice of what is said in the suttas, they're good. They're on their way. Now, there was a mention earlier about as the person progresses on the path, the patipada, the practice of the Dhamma, not just the study. This is when the Dhamma becomes more and more alive. It's not a memorization thing. It's not just blindly following the, rigidly adhering to the Vinaya and just not going beyond them, not penetrating them, not seeing the Dhamma, basically. And instead, when a person does practice diligently, they will experience what usually in English are translated as direct knowledge and vision of awakening. And previously, I've mentioned it many times, and other teachers have mentioned it even more extensively, as to the 4 stages of awakening, meaning the stages of nobility, the one who has entered the stream, the one who is a once returner, the one who is a non-returner, and the one who is an Arahant, both their path and fruition stages, which makes the 4 turn into 8 with these 2 subdivisions. Now, without getting into that, much detail, in the Suttas, we come across often this term that the Buddha uses, Adhi Sila, Adhi Samādhi, Adhi Paññā. Now this is a level of practicing the 3 trainings, which are the Sila, Samadhi, Paññā, which normally is what a person practices until they get to the stage of nobility, meaning they have the vision, they have the Dhamma eye, which I like to call, they pass the point of no return. Things are never going to be the same for these people. Disenchantment gets stronger. Dispassion gets stronger towards things that they enjoyed even half an hour ago. They probably have dedicated their entire lives for that, whether it's a profession or a lifestyle. All of a sudden, there isn't that intensity. Slowly, there's a shift that takes place. When we say they have the eye of Dhamma, or the vision, where they glance, they have this quick glimpse of Nibbāna, if you will. But they know they have experienced it. They know. There's no way that anyone will ever be able to convince them otherwise. In fact, there's an incident of a layperson who had reached the first stage, from what I remember in the Suttas, and he returns home after the Dhamma talk given by the Buddha. The Buddha who helped him to reach that stage. So he goes to work in the morning as one person, he returns back totally transformed. Now Mara doesn't like this. And now he has to go, because Mara doesn't have any concept of any of these supramundane stages. He doesn't know what happens. He doesn't know how this experience feels like, is like. So in his mind, it's something like this. You know what? Let me shapeshift and take on the guise, take on the look of the Buddha himself, and go and knock on this fellow's door. And that's what he does. He goes and knocks on this man's door. And the man opens the door and he's completely startled, and because the Buddha showed up. And this is so unheard of. And because it's late in the day, the Buddha is in the monastery. But again, for all intents and purposes, it's the Buddha. So he immediately pays homage to him, bows down, prostrates, and says, "Yes, Lord, how may I assist you? Is there anything you need?" etc. And Mara says, in his own way, "You know that thing that I was telling you about, anicca, dukkha, anatta? This whole business about impermanence and suffering, this and that, the aggregates being impermanent. that's actually, I was wrong. I was mistaken. In fact, that's, the experience that you had also is like, it was kind of like a mistake, it was misconstrued, it was misunderstood. So I just wanted to come to you and explain that. So the man who's listening immediately knows that what is being said to him by seemingly the Buddha himself, Gautama, his teacher, does not ring true to what is being experienced in his heart, because he has had the vision of the Dhamma. And here, for all intents and purposes, the Buddha is standing right there, telling him, trying to convince him that the experience he's had, the knowledge and vision, was an error. And he said, my teacher would never say this. And he says, who is standing in front of me? For surely it is not Lord Buddha. Is it you, Mara? And Mara, despite all his faults, shall we say, he will never lie when he's called upon by his name. And he must reveal himself, for his true face has to be revealed, basically. And that's what happens. In front of this man's eyes, he transforms himself. Now, even the Buddha showing up at this man's door could not convince him otherwise. That is the certitude, that is the unshakability in knowing. That's why we call it direct knowledge. This is not some commentary that you read or spent 45 years or 100 years exploring and analyzing, being a bookworm. This is something you've practiced and you've tasted for yourself, and you know it. No one, not even the Buddha, is going to shake that off of you, out of you. That certainty legitimizes the Dhamma. Now that carries a person deeper and deeper, even though they say it's like 7 lifetimes at the most that the person has to endure, in a sense, until they become an Arahant. But that's like for a very, very lazy person. I have never come across anywhere in the Suttas or anywhere where that has been the case. Oftentimes it's in the same lifetime that the person becomes an Arahant, or maybe in the second, or on landing in a different realm. But anyhow, when a person has thus become a noble disciple, that's where nobility part comes in. Because now you do not belong to the category of a mere mortal or even a divine being. Who has not reached that state. Even devas and gods bow to such a person, because automatically, in becoming a Sotapanna, the person has within his or her own DNA the very fibers of Sila. It's not imposed from the outside. They carry it within their lifeblood, within their DNA, spiritual or otherwise. Things have changed. Things have shifted. There's so many beautiful examples of this. The one I'm thinking of is right now in the Ratana Sutta, where the Buddha describes this. Where even if there's a mistake committed by this person on this level, they cannot walk away from it. They cannot bury it. They have to at least come out and say it to someone. When they could have easily lied in the past, now they can't. So, for such a person, Sila or the Vinaya becomes inherently part of their nature. So every action, every thought, every word that comes out of them is Adhi Sila, which is higher Sila, supramundane, if you will, compared to mundane Sila, which is just following, let's say in the case of the Bhikkhus, 220. The 7 are just for how to execute punishments, things like that. But 220 plus precepts or Vinaya rules, the Patimukha. And already the Bhikkhu or Bhikkhuni at this level, by the way, you don't have to become a Bhikkhuni or a Bhikkhu in order for you to experience Sotapanna, Sakadagami, or Anagami even. But for an Arahant, if you are a layperson, soon you better be putting on the robes, because you won't be lasting long as a layperson. Why? Remember the disenchantment, the dispassion that I was mentioning earlier? Well, as the person progresses, it becomes harder and harder and harder for them to want to stay in household life. Their taste buds will not be carrying such a colorful plethora of flavors anymore. Same with the eyes, same with the ears, same with the body, same with all of the senses, including the mind. So, when the Bhikkhu and the Bhikkhuni, that's what I'm referring to, like today's, this conversation that started on this topic. If the person is on that level, or those levels, they cannot live without Sila. You do not have to see them doing certain things on the outside, let's say, repeating precepts or reading, even chanting the Vinaya. I know this might sound controversial, but in today's day and age, it's become harder and harder to do that and find a collection of bhikkhus or bhikkhunis who do that. However, I'm glad there are communities of monastics who are continuing the Uposatha ceremony and the chanting, the Patimukha. So that's good. But we shouldn't just be attached to the outside appearances. This is important because sometimes people will look at a certain bhikkhuni or a bhikkhu and say, well, you are not practicing this, or you're not supposed to do that, this and that. Well, many of them don't realize that there was a whole slew of minor rules that were left up to the discretion of the Sangha by the Buddha at his deathbed. And Venerable Ananda unfortunately didn't ask Lord Buddha at that last critical moment as to what these minor rules are. So later on in the first council, the Arahant bhikkhus all decided that might as well just keep them all. major and minor rules. However, fortunately, there is the fail-safe system of being a noble disciple, where just like the person's life becomes anchored on the Dhamma, it goes without saying that it is also anchored in the Vinaya, period. That is what the Buddha meant, to my understanding, by equating both, by putting them both as solid, diamond-like sources to check things and testimonies or statements to see whether they are authentic or not. Because if you hold the Vinaya, you're holding also the Dhamma. If you're holding the Dhamma, you're also holding the Vinaya. And the noble disciple holds them both in one's heart. They wake up with it, they sleep with it, they walk with it, they live with it. When they're seeing something with the eye, they're seeing them both with the Dhamma and the Vinaya. They're listening or hearing something with the ears. They're listening or hearing with the Dhamma and Vinaya. They're touching something with their body, the same. They're smelling something with the nose, the same. They're tasting something with the tongue, it's the same. They're knowing and understanding a perception, a memory, something that's happening in the mind, arising, a thought. It is being touched, looked at, observed with both conjoined, the Dhamma and the Vinaya, inescapably. That is living with Sila, Samadhi, Paññā, which has now turned in the person into Adhi Sila, Adhi Samādhi, and Adhi Paññā. May this be helpful to you. And may the Triple Gem protect you and strengthen your practice, because without diligent, intentional effort on your part, none of this will become a reality for you. And it must become a reality for you. You cannot live the Dhamma vicariously through someone else. This is your life. This is your life. Your suffering. Your ignorance. Your wisdom that's waiting for you. In each moment, and Nibbāna can occur in each moment. Any moment is the perfect moment, I've said in the past, for Nibbāna to occur. Any moment, even one as mundane as now. So, may your efforts be fruitful, so long as they are based on the legitimate Dhamma proper, with the three trainings, Sila, Samadhi, Paññā. As you diligently practice with heedfulness and faith in the virtuous lifestyle that you're adhering to, you're living your life by, practicing the 5 precepts. Starting from there, practice them and they will take you straight to Nibbāna. The Buddha never taught anything that would cause us to skulk around and stick around a little bit longer. He was interested very much, invested very much in getting us to the other shore, over this flood, as soon as possible. That's why he has been the most hardest working teacher I've ever come across. The most compassionate, the most dedicated and loving teacher. So may your efforts be successful. And with the blessings of the Triple Gem, the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, Sukhi Hovotu, may you all be blessed.